For decades, one hot report could knock gold flat on its back, and every seasoned holder knew it. A number would land, the return on cash and government bonds would jump, and gold would fall like clockwork. That fear is exactly why you click this. And I am here to tell you the rule that made that fear real has quietly broken. So let me answer the title before I do anything else, because I owe you that. Yes, we are in one of those stretches where every big release feels like a loaded gun pointed at what you own, where it feels like you are one report away from a move that either makes your year or ruins your week. But do not sell into that fear. The old machine that made a single report so dangerous for gold has come apart at the seams, and once you see how, you will understand why the smart response to this moment is patience, not panic. Here is the concrete thing to chew on, and it is not a price on a screen. For most of my career, gold behaved like a mirror of one number, the real yield, the return you get after inflation on safe paper. When that return rose, gold fell. When that return dropped, gold rose. It was almost mechanical, and every trading desk built its playbook around it. Recently, that mirror cracked. Gold climbed while that return stayed stubbornly high. The two things that were supposed to move in opposite directions stopped listening to each other. And when a relationship that reliable breaks, it is never random. It means a bigger hand is now on the wheel. In my years working alongside people trying to protect what they spent a lifetime earning, I have learned that the scariest sounding market days are usually the ones built on a rule that no longer applies. So let me walk you through the old rule, why it made report day terrifying, and why it has stopped running the show. Because the enemy here is not the report. The enemy is the crowd of desks and financial television voices who still narrate gold by yesterday's rulebook, and who make their money when you flinch. Start with the mechanism, because the mechanism is everything. Gold pays you no interest. It sits there, honest and quiet, and it earns nothing. So when the return on safe paper rises, the story goes, holding gold costs you something, the yield you gave up. A hot inflation report or a hawkish turn would push those yields up, and the traders who thought of gold as nothing more than a yield trade would hit the sell button in unison. That is the whole reason a single release could send gold down hard in an afternoon. It was not that anything real had changed about the metal. It was that one narrow group of buyers treated gold like a bet on interest rates, and interest rates had just moved against them. Now hold that in your mind, because here is where it gets strange. That group, the yield chasers, the paper gold crowd in the big Western funds, used to be the marginal buyer, the last dollar in that set the price. When they sold on a hot report, the price fell, plain and simple. But recently, someone else has become the last dollar in. And this new buyer does not care about the yield on paper at all. This new buyer is not trying to beat the return on a bond. This new buyer is trying to own something that cannot be printed, cannot be defaulted on, and cannot be switched off by anyone. And so when the report lands and the yield chasers sell, this other buyer simply keeps buying, and the old relationship stops working. Who is that buyer? The central banks of the world, the same institutions that manage the reserves of entire nations. For 3 years running, they bought gold at a pace not seen in a generation, well past 1,000 tons a year, roughly double what they had been doing the decade before. That buying has cooled and turned choppy lately. I will be honest with you about that, but the shift it represents is structural and it did not reverse. Somewhere in the last stretch, gold quietly passed the euro to become the second largest reserve asset held by the world's central banks, behind only the dollar itself. Think about what that means. The most conservative money managers on the planet, the ones who move slowly and hate surprises, decided they would rather hold metal than another government's paper promises. That is the bigger hand on the wheel. That is why one report cannot do what it used to. And that shift did not come from nowhere. It came from a lesson, and it is a lesson every one of you should carry. Not long ago, a major world power woke up to find a huge slice of its reserves frozen, unusable, switched off with the stroke of a pen, because those reserves were held as someone else's promise, sitting in someone else's system. The other central banks watched that happen, and they drew the obvious conclusion. Reserves you hold as a claim on someone else can be taken away. Metal you hold in your own vault cannot. There is no politics in a bar of gold. It does not care who you voted for or what side of a border you sit on. It just sits there. Yours. Final. That lesson is not only for central banks, and this is the natural place to bring it home to you, because it is the same lesson that protects your retirement. If you are holding $100,000 or more in a 401k or an IRA, here is something worth understanding right now. My family put together a free guide called the Retirement Wealth Protection Guide, and it walks through exactly how an American retiree can diversify a portion of the savings you already have into physical gold and silver, held inside the retirement account you already own, without taxes and without penalties. The same principle the central banks just relearned the hard way, that owning the real thing beats owning a promise you cannot control, applies to your nest egg too. This is not just for insiders or the wealthy. If you have $100,000 or more in any retirement account, this is for you. If you are watching this on your TV, just scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to readfamilyguide.com. From our family to yours, no obligation and nothing to buy. Now, back to the story, because I promised you history, and history is where this gets undeniable. This is not the first time a rule that always held suddenly stopped holding once a bigger force arrived. Go back to the era when a small club of nations pooled their gold to defend a fixed price for it. 8 countries pledged their own reserves to keep that price pinned day after day. And for a while, it worked, the way the old yield rule worked. Then the pressure grew too great. The metal drained out faster than they could replace it, and one day they simply gave up and walked away. The rule did not bend. It broke, all at once, and everyone who had trusted it to hold forever got caught flat-footed. And that is not even the biggest piece. Not long after, the dollar itself was still tied to gold, redeemable, backed. The world was told that link was permanent, sacred, the foundation of the whole system. Then, almost overnight, a president closed that window and called it temporary. It was never reopened. Temporary became forever. I bring these up not to scare you, but to show you the pattern, because I have seen versions of it more than once. A relationship the whole market treats as a law of nature holds right up until a larger force decides it will not hold anymore. And the people who kept trading on the old law were the last to figure out the game had changed. And if you want to see the old rule at the very peak of its power, look at the episode a decade or so back, when the market got nothing more than a hint that the central bank might slow its bond buying. Not a fact, not a done deal, just a suggestion that the flood of easy money might taper. That whisper alone sent yields jumping, and gold fell hard. Close to a third of its value peeled off over the stretch that followed, on a rumor about future policy. That is how tightly gold was chained to the yield story back then. A hint moved it violently. Now, sit with the contrast. Today, the actual yields have stayed high, the reports keep landing hot, the hawkish talk is right out in the open, with real voices arguing for tighter policy. And gold has refused to play its old part. The same input that once crushed it no longer does. When the medicine stops working, you do not conclude the patient is fine. You conclude the disease changed. There is a structural piece under this too, and it is the part the desks least want you to think about. For every ounce of real, deliverable gold, there are many times that number of paper claims trading hands, contracts and promises stacked on top of the metal like a tower on a small foundation. That is what makes the price so easy to shove around on a quiet report day, because most of what trades is paper, and paper is cheap to sell. But it is also the tower's weakness. The moment enough holders decide they want the real bar instead of the paper claim, the whole arrangement strains, and the registered metal available to actually deliver has been drawn down over time, not built up. This is why the difference between owning metal and owning a promise is not a philosophical point. It is the entire ballgame, and the patient money already knows it. So when I hear the financial channels tell you that gold should fall because some report pushed yields up, I hear people reading from a rulebook that already got rewritten under their feet. That is the through line you have to hold on to. The big desks, the media voices, the folks who profit when you churn your position, they need you to believe the old rule still governs, because a frightened holder dumping metal on report day is their favorite kind of customer. When they tell you to worry about the next number, ask yourself who is on the other side of the trade when you sell. It is not the little guy. It is the patient money, quietly taking the metal off your hands. Let me be straight with you, though, because you should never trust a man who only tells you the good half. This is a case, not a guarantee, and it is not personal financial advice. Reports can still knock gold around in the short run. A single release can absolutely spike fear and shake the price for days, and I am not going to insult you by pretending I know which day or how far. There is another honest risk, too. When a real conflict is brewing, gold builds in a fear premium, and when that conflict cools off, that premium bleeds right back out, and gold can slide even though nothing about the long story changed. We have seen that movie before, a spike on the thread of war that grinds lower once the tension eases. So do not expect a straight line up, and do not let anyone sell you one. What I am telling you is not that gold cannot fall. It is that the specific machine that made a single report a catastrophe for gold has lost its grip. Here is a way to feel the difference. Picture a retired maintenance foreman in Ohio, a man who spent 40 years keeping a plant running, who saved carefully, who did everything the responsible way. For most of his working life, when he heard a hot number was coming, he had every reason to brace, because he watched gold get slapped down on exactly those days again and again. That instinct was earned. It was correct for its time, but the ground under that instinct has moved. The buyer who used to be absent on those days, the one who does not blink at a yield number, is now the one setting the floor. So the reflex that once protected him, the urge to get out ahead of the report, is now the very reflex that would hand his metal to the patient money at the worst possible moment. The lesson that kept him safe for decades has quietly become the trap. And notice something the mainstream still refuses to say out loud. Silver has been the louder half of this story lately, coming alive while gold does its quiet work, and the gap between the two has compressed hard from the extreme it hit not long ago. But the deeper signal is the same in both metals. The marginal buyer has changed. In gold, it is the central banks. In silver, it is a world that keeps burning the metal in industry faster than it pulls it out of the ground, a structural shortage that does not care what a report printed this morning. Two different metals, one message. The people who set the price today are not the people the old models were built around. Now watch what happens when you put all of this together, because this is the part almost nobody connects. The old rule said gold is a bet on interest rates. The new reality says gold is a vote against counting on anyone else's promise. Those are not small differences in degree. They are opposite theories of what gold even is. And the market is in the middle of switching from one to the other, right now, while most of the financial world is still doing the arithmetic the old way. That is the bigger force in control I keep coming back to. It is not one report. It is a change in who owns the last ounce and why. This is the moment I most want you to understand, because it is where the whole thing turns. The largest, most cautious buyers on earth have already made their move. They repriced their reserves toward metal while the crowd was still watching the yield screen. The pension funds, the mainstream advisors, the everyday saver, most of them have not caught up, and many of them are still being told, on good authority, that gold should behave the old way. The repricing does not wait for permission, and it does not announce itself on the evening news. By the time the financial channels finally admit the rule broke, by the time your neighbor is asking how to buy, the patient money will already be sitting where the easy part of this happened. Being early is uncomfortable precisely because it feels like nothing is urgent. That quiet is the opportunity, not the all clear. There is one more force underneath all of this that I would be doing you a disservice to skip, and it is the fiscal picture. When a government owes more than it can ever comfortably repay, the pressure builds to keep the cost of that debt low, to let inflation do the quiet work of shrinking what is owed. History is full of stretches where the central bank ended up pinning yields down to serve the debt rather than the saver. In that world, real yields can stay high on paper, and gold can still climb, because sophisticated money looks past the printed yield to the deeper truth that the currency itself is being managed for the borrower, not for you. That is another reason the old mirror cracked. The metal is no longer trading on this quarter's return. It is trading on the long arithmetic of debt that everyone can see and almost no one wants to name. So, what do you actually do with your own position, sitting where you sit? A few honest principles, not a prescription. Own the real metal, not a paper claim on it, because the entire point of this moment is the difference between the thing and the promise. Size what you hold so that no shakeout, no scary report, no ugly week can ever force you to sell at the bottom, because forced selling is how good people lose in these episodes. And do not hand your metal to the patient money on a day of manufactured fear. If your stomach knots every time a big number is coming, that is not a signal to sell. That is the old reflex firing on an old rule. Recognize it and let it pass. Which brings me back to where we started, and to the honest reason now is the moment to understand this now rather than later. The window when a decision like this is still cheap and calm and completely reversible is exactly the window when nothing feels urgent, when the crisis is not on the front page, when you have time to think it through. That window is open right now. If you have $100,000 or more in a 401k or an IRA, The free Retirement Wealth Protection Guide walks you and your family through how to diversify a portion of what you have built into physical gold and silver inside your existing account, protecting not only what you spend in your own retirement, but what your children and grandchildren will one day inherit. And for those of you serious about this, who watched to the end and mentioned that you did, we offer a free, no obligation, one-on-one educational web conference to walk through your own situation. If you are on your TV, scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to readfamilyguide.com. From our family to yours. Because here is the thing that foreman in Ohio finally understood, and I hope you understand it too. For decades, one report could knock gold flat, and bracing for it was wisdom. But the rule that made that fear real has broken. A bigger and quieter buyer now sets the floor, and the reflex that used to save you is the very thing that would cost you today. Do not sell into a fear built on yesterday's rulebook. The report is not your enemy. The old story about the report is. Hold on to what is real and let the patient money keep telling you, with every ounce it takes off the frightened, exactly which side of this you want to be on.